They say every generation is shaped by its time, that the world around us becomes the world within us. But what happens when the world changes faster than a child can grow? The 2000s weren't just another decade. They were a threshold, a turning point between two realities, one analog, one digital, one slow, one instant, one private, one permanently visible. If you grew up in the 2000s, you didn't just witness change. You absorbed it. You became fluent in two languages, the language of the physical world and the language of the screen. You learned to exist in both, never fully belonging to either. And now, as adults, something feels unfinished. A quiet restlessness. A strange nostalgia for a childhood you can't quite hold. A fatigue you can't quite name. This isn't about technology. It's about identity formed in the space between worlds. This is the psychology of a generation caught in translation. Let's begin. There is a psychological term that doesn't quite exist yet, but should. It's the feeling of being born into one world and growing up into another. Not gradually, not over centuries, but within the span of a single childhood. If you grew up in the 2000s, you remember what it was like to wait. To wait for the internet to connect. To wait for your favorite song to play on the radio so you could record it. To wait for your parents to finish their phone call so you could go online. Waiting wasn't frustrating. It was just part of life. You knew boredom. Real boredom. The kind that stretched long and slow on summer afternoons, where time felt thick and you had to invent your own worlds to fill it. But then, something shifted. By the time you reached adolescence, waiting had become intolerable. Boredom became a problem to solve. The internet stopped being a destination you visited and became the air you breathed. The phone in your pocket wasn't a tool, it was an extension of your nervous system. And here's what no one talks about. You adapted. Beautifully. Seamlessly. You learned to navigate both realities without even realizing you were doing it. But adaptation has a cost. Psychologists describe a phenomenon called cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort of holding two conflicting beliefs at once. But what happens when you hold two conflicting realities? You grew up knowing how to entertain yourself for hours with nothing but imagination. And you also grew up needing instant stimulation to feel okay. You value deep connection. And you've been trained to scroll past it. You crave slowness. And you're exhausted by how fast everything moves. You are, in many ways, a walking contradiction. Not because you're confused, but because you were raised in a world that contradicted itself. The 2000s were a bridge, and you were born on it. You remember a time before you were always reachable, before every moment could be photographed, before your life had to be narrated in real time. And yet, you also don't fully remember what it felt like to live without those things. This isn't nostalgia. It's something deeper. It's the quiet ache of a generation that was never fully one thing or the other. Not analog, not digital, not old, not new, just in between. And that in-between space. It's where your psychology was formed. Childhood is supposed to unfold slowly. That's how development works. The brain needs time. Time to play. Time to wonder. Time to make sense of the world at a pace it can metabolize. But in the 2000s, time didn't slow down. It sped up. Think about it. In the span of 10 years, you went from VHS tapes to DVDs to streaming. From desktop computers to laptops to phones that fit in your palm. From writing notes in class to texting under the desk. From film cameras to digital to Instagram. Each shift wasn't just technological. It was cultural. It was psychological. Every time the world changed, you had to change with it. And you were still a child. Developmental psychologists talk about critical periods, windows of time when the brain is especially sensitive to certain kinds of learning. Language, attachment, social behavior, identity formation. Your critical periods happened during a revolution. While your brain was learning how to relate to others, the rules of relating were being rewritten. While you were learning who you were, the concept of selfhood was migrating online. While you were developing your attention span, the architecture of distraction was being perfected. And here's the part that's hard to name: you didn't just experience these changes. You internalized them. You learned flexibility, adaptability, the ability to pivot quickly, learn new systems, translate between formats. You became incredibly skilled at keeping up. But no one asked what it cost you to keep up that fast. Because here's what happens when childhood accelerates: you lose the luxury of slowness, of depth, of staying with one thing long enough to let it settle into your bones. You learn to skim, to toggle, to move on before you were ready, because the world had already moved on. And now, as an adult, you feel it. The restlessness. The inability to sit still without reaching for your phone. The guilt when you try to rest. The sense that you're always behind, even when there's nothing to be behind on. This isn't a personal failing. It's a nervous system shaped by speed. You grew up in a decade that asked children to keep pace with adults, with markets, with innovation cycles. And you did. You kept pace beautifully. But your brain was never supposed to run that fast for that long. The 2000s didn't just change the world. They changed the tempo of growing up. And you've been moving at that tempo ever since. There's a moment in every person's life when they begin to ask, "Who am I?" For most of human history, that question was answered slowly. Through relationships. Through trial and error. Through private reflection and gradual self-discovery. But if you grew up in the 2000s, that question became public before it was personal. MySpace, Facebook, FormSpring, Tumblr, MSN Messenger. These weren't just platforms. They were mirrors. And you were still learning what face to make in them. You were asked to choose a profile picture, a bio, a status, a top 8, a mood, an aesthetic. You were asked to curate yourself before you even knew who yourself was. And here's the psychological trap. You learned to perform identity before you learned to feel it. Psychologists call this identity foreclosure, when a person adopts an identity without truly exploring it. It's what happens when external expectations solidify before internal clarity emerges. In the 2000s, the external came early. And it came loud. You learned that who you were wasn't just a private experience. It was a presentation, a brand, a set of choices others could see and judge and comment on. You learned to split yourself. The version you were at home, the version you were at school, the version you were online. And slowly, the lines between them began to blur. Which one was real? Maybe all of them. Maybe none of them. And here's what no one prepared you for. Once you start performing the self, it's very hard to stop. Even now, years later, you might feel it. The subtle anxiety when you post something. The need to curate your life into something presentable. The quiet discomfort when you're just being without an audience. It's not vanity. It's conditioning. You were taught, during the most impressionable years of your life, that existence required witness. That to be seen was to matter. That privacy was optional, but visibility was survival. And so you learned to manage perception, to edit in real time, to split your attention between living a moment and capturing it. But the self isn't a brand. It's not a gallery. It's not a feed. The self is messy, contradictory, private, unfinished, and somewhere deep inside, you remember that. You remember what it felt like to just be, without documenting, without analyzing, without wondering how it looked. You remember the self before the screen. And maybe that's what the ache is. Not nostalgia for a time, but nostalgia for a version of you that didn't have to perform to exist. They say nostalgia is a longing for the past. But that's not quite right. Nostalgia isn't about the past. It's about what the past felt like. And if you grew up in the 2000s, you know this feeling well. The ache when you hear a certain song. The sudden rush of emotion when you see an old Windows screensaver, or a flip phone, or a commercial you haven't thought about in years. It's not the objects themselves. It's what they represent. A time when things were slower, simpler, smaller. A time when you weren't always reachable. When your mistakes weren't permanent. When the world wasn't asking so much of you, so fast. But here's what psychology reveals. Intense nostalgia is often a sign of present distress. When the present feels overwhelming, the mind retreats. Not into fantasy, into memory, into the safety of a time when you didn't have to hold so much. Nostalgia becomes a refuge. And for people who grew up in the 2000s, that refuge feels especially vivid. Because your childhood exists in a strange liminal space, recent enough to remember clearly, distant enough to feel unreachable. You can still recall the texture of it. The sound of dial-up. The weight of a CD case. The way your room looked in the afternoon light, before everything moved online. But you can't go back. Not really. Because that world doesn't exist anymore. The internet you grew up with, the one that felt like a destination, a secret place you logged into and out of, is gone. It's been replaced by something omnipresent, inescapable, algorithmic. The slowness you remember? It's been optimized out of existence. The privacy you had? It's been traded for convenience. And so the nostalgia isn't just personal. It's cultural. It's collective. You're not just mourning your childhood. You're mourning a version of the world that will never return. But here's the deeper truth beneath the longing. What you're really aching for isn't the past itself. It's presence. You're aching for the feeling of being here, fully, completely, without distraction or division. You're aching for a nervous system that isn't always braced for the next notification. For a mind that can rest without guilt. For a selfhood that doesn't need to be curated or explained. Nostalgia, in this sense, isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It's your psyche whispering, something was lost, something mattered, and you're allowed to grieve it. Because before you can move forward, you have to honor what was left behind. There's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't show up on the surface. You're not collapsing. You're functioning. You're keeping up. You're meeting deadlines and showing up and doing what's expected. But underneath, something is depleted. It's not laziness. It's not weakness. It's the cumulative weight of adapting endlessly, without rest. If you grew up in the 2000s, you've been adapting your entire life. You adapted to new technology every few years. You adapted to new social norms. You adapted to the collapse of privacy, the rise of performance, the acceleration of everything. And you did it during the most formative years of your development. Your nervous system learned one lesson above all others. Keep up or get left behind. And so you kept up. You learned every new platform. You stayed relevant. You pivoted. You evolved. But the body doesn't forget. Neuroscientists have discovered that chronic adaptation, especially during childhood, can dysregulate the stress response system. The brain becomes wired for vigilance, for scanning, for constant readiness. You become very good at responding, and very bad at resting. Because rest requires safety, and somewhere deep inside, you never fully learned that it was safe to stop. The world kept moving, and so did you. Even now, you might notice it. The difficulty sitting still. The guilt when you're not productive. The vague sense that you're always supposed to be doing something, even when there's nothing that needs to be done. This is what psychologists are beginning to call ambient anxiety, a low-grade, chronic activation that doesn't have a clear source. It's not about one stressor. It's about a system that was trained to stay alert. And it's exhausting. Not the kind of exhaustion that sleep fixes. The kind that lives in your bones. You're tired of keeping up. Tired of performing. Tired of toggling between versions of yourself. Tired of the speed. But you don't always have the language for it. Because this burnout was never named. It was never acknowledged as a collective experience. You were just told you were stressed, or anxious, or unmotivated. But it's none of those things. It's the natural consequence of a childhood spent in transition. You didn't get to grow up in one stable world. You grew up in 5 different worlds, all at once, all demanding adjustment. And now, your nervous system is asking for what it never got: permission to slow down. Not forever. Not dramatically. Just enough to catch your breath. Enough to remember what it feels like to be still. Because you've been moving for so long. And maybe it's time to stop. Here's the truth they don't tell you about growing up between worlds. It doesn't make you broken. It makes you bilingual. You can speak the language of slowness and speed, of presence and performance, of analog and digital. You hold both. And that's not a flaw. That's a gift. Yes, it came at a cost. Yes, it's been exhausting. Yes, there are parts of your childhood you'll never get back. But there are also parts of you that exist because of it. You are resilient in ways previous generations weren't required to be. You are adaptable, resourceful. You can learn new systems quickly, translate between realities, hold complexity without breaking. You've been trained for a world in flux. And whether you wanted that training or not, you have it. The question now isn't whether you can keep up. It's whether you can slow down. Because here's what integration looks like. It's not choosing one world over the other. It's not rejecting technology or retreating into nostalgia. It's learning to hold both, without being torn apart by them. It's using the tools of the digital world without letting them use you. It's honoring the pace of the analog world without romanticizing a past that wasn't perfect. It's knowing when to log off, when to be still, when to let yourself be bored, or quiet, or unseen. It's reclaiming the parts of yourself that got lost in the acceleration. The part that knows how to wait, how to wonder, how to be without performing. That part didn't disappear. It's still there. Buried under years of conditioning, yes. Under layers of adaptation and speed and vigilance. But it's still there. And maybe the work now, the quiet, unglamorous work, is excavation. Not fixing yourself. Not optimizing. Not becoming more productive or more resilient. Just remembering. Remembering what it felt like to be present. To exist without an audience. To move through the world without documenting it. You don't need to go back to the 2000s to find that feeling. You just need to give yourself permission to stop moving long enough to feel it again. Because you were never supposed to keep up forever. You were supposed to grow, to rest, to become. And you still can. The world may have sped up. But you don't have to. You can choose slowness, depth, presence. You can choose to be both digital and human, adapted and authentic, shaped by your time, but not defined by it. This is your story. And you're still writing it. If this reflection touched something quiet inside you, something you felt but couldn't name, you're not alone. So many people who grew up in the 2000s carry this same ache. This same restlessness. This same longing for a version of the world, and of themselves, that feels just out of reach. But here's what matters. You're beginning to see it now. You're beginning to understand that the exhaustion isn't your fault. That the nostalgia isn't weakness. That the struggle to be present isn't a personal failure. It's the echo of a childhood spent between worlds. And that understanding. It's the first step toward integration. If you'd like to stay connected to more reflections like this, explorations of the hidden corners of the human heart, the psychology beneath the surface, the truths we carry in silence, you're welcome here. This is a space for depth, for slowness, for seeing yourself more clearly. And if something in this video resonated with you, feel free to share it in the comments. Not because you have to, but because your words might help someone else feel a little less alone. You've been moving so fast for so long. You deserve to rest. You deserve to be seen. You deserve gentleness. Take care of yourself.